Today, we are looking at the little supplement that could. Delta Green, the Cthulhu sourcebook that started as a mere adventure in an Unspeakable Oath magazine, which then got its own book, and then turned into its own game. This book reached equal status with its source material, as it turned everything we knew about Lovecraftian mythos on its ear. Instead of expendable independent investigators searching for unknown and unspeakable horrors, now the characters are expendable government agents looking for known and unspeakable horrors, at least until they are disavowed. It's equal parts Call of Cthulhu, the SCP Foundation, and X-Files. Delta Green has the reputation of being one of the best horror RPGs ever written. Time to find out why. I'm Mr. Welch, and if it bleeds, we can kill it. Sometimes. The premise of Delta Green is the United States government has a vague knowledge of the Cthulhu mythos. By vague idea, I mean they're sitting on about 5% mythos lore, so they can spot when something cultish is happening, but they don't know exactly what. At first, it was an actual organization with funding, agents, and a consolidated library about their investigations. Then, during the Vietnam War, something went very wrong on a mission in Cambodia. The specifics of this event are left vague on purpose, but afterwards, there was no more Delta Green. The organization was dissolved, and its history was expunged from the records. But if it ended there wouldn't be a game, would there? Instead, the agents were scattered across various federal agencies. The previous leaders disappeared into the vast government bureaucracy, and it was like it never existed. However, when evidence of mythos happenings reached certain desks, specific agents of various organizations were dispatched to investigate.
Kent Mansley, United States Government, Unexplained Phenomena Department.
While Delta Green is known for being a Call of Cthulhu supplement, its original version included a crossover with Cyberpunk 2020, appearing first in the Unspeakable Oath No. 7 adventure Convergence back in 1992. It gave the purpose of Delta Green, but didn't provide a lot of background. It established the off-the-books nature of the group and explains that the organization has agents of all types, from data analysts to door kickers and everyone in between. This is a Cthulhu game. You're going to need people to figure out what's going on. The odd man out in most adventures like these was the combat specialist. People who tried to fight the eldritch horrors didn't live very long in the game. But Delta Green shifted the source of conflict away from the Great Old Ones and Star Spawn and other similar monsters to more human cultists. The antagonist could be handled with increased violence, though getting into fights was still very much not recommended. The base game is still one of the deadliest ever created, and giving the player characters bigger guns doesn't change the fact that they are still very squishy. The original Delta Green sourcebook was made under license by Pagan Publishing in 1996, with Dennis Detweiler, Adam Scott Glancy, and John Tynes getting credit as the designers. It was not a standalone game. You still needed a copy of Call of Cthulhu to play it. It was an alternate setting, one that kicked the timeline to the 90s and gave the classic game a modern makeover. This was right at the height of the grimdark darkness of the grimdark 90s, so the timing was perfect. 10 years later, the game was updated to the D20 system, and then 3 years after that, Targets of Opportunity came out, adding more bad guys to the world. Detweiler later formed Arc Dream Games, and in 2016 released an updated version of Delta Green, bringing it into the new century. Delta Green's origins started in 1928 when the U.S. government ordered a raid on the town of Innsmouth, fearing communist sympathizers. Instead, the FBI agents, Marines, and Coast Guard got Deep One hybrids populating the town. There was a fierce battle, but the population of Innsmouth was defeated, and the federal government found itself in possession of a large amount of Dagoth cultists and corpses. Due to the politics involved in discovering half-human hybrids living in New England, the investigation was dropped to prevent the public from discovering the truth. But the Navy didn't let it go, and later it formed P Division, which was tasked with investigating mythos-related events. When World War II broke out, P Division searched for Dagon cultists and hybrids in the Pacific. They didn't understand yet the full scope of the supernatural threat to the world, just the ones that they had discovered. The leader of P Division, Lieutenant Commander Martin Cook, was able to brief the head of OSS, Wild Bill Donovan, about using the Axis' obsession with the supernatural against them. He left out all the parts where P Division had found solid evidence of the paranormal, but it was an easier sell for the general. Donovan was convinced that this was a great idea, giving P Division increased authority and its official code name, Delta Green. The organization spent the rest of WW2 fighting against the SS Karatechia, their Nazi equivalent. Much of this was secretly racing to get forbidden manuscripts or artifacts, either to acquire them for the war effort or to destroy them to prevent the enemy from obtaining them. After the war, Delta Green was tasked with acquiring all the information the Nazis had on the supernatural, as well as apprehending any members of Karatechia they could find. And while they did recover reams of documents, Most of the Karateka officers who were captured were deemed to be insane and were executed instead. Delta Green fought a final shadow war with the remnants of Karateka and Operation Werewolf, where they finally destroyed the occultists. Then President Truman disbanded the organization after the war. Now a scaled-down shell of itself, Delta Green spent the Cold War fighting cultists across the globe, tracking down mythos activity and preventing creatures from crossing into this reality. It was hampered by the loss of two of their original leaders, who finally snapped from their exposure to the forbidden lore that they had been seeking for decades. When new personnel were needed, the group would find qualified individuals, brief them on what was expected of them, and then dispatch them to investigate a mystery. The newly recruited individuals would then go back to their original assignment, but had a little green triangle attached to their file to indicate that they were assets to be used in future cases. The fall of Delta Green happened in Vietnam, when the CIA started arming friendly tribes to fight against the Viet Cong. One of these tribes was the Cho-Cho, a group known for their sadistic nature and cannibalistic tendencies. They also worshipped a great old one, and when they tried to summon him, Delta Green attempted to stop them. This resulted in the death of over 300 U.S. troops and created a scandal for the U.S. government, as the battle took place in Cambodia when the U.S. wasn't supposed to be in Cambodia. As a result, the group was completely disbanded, and everybody involved in it was reassigned to other agencies. This didn't stop them, as the members kept in touch and functioned as a shadow organization, with no funding, authorization, or assets, but that wasn't going to stop them. Now the agents worked against the paranormal threats from their new agencies, with no one the wiser to what they were actually facing. When one of their members was assassinated by Majesty 12, a rival government group connected to the Roswell aliens, Delta Green knew it had to reorganize. It contacted past assets, created a cell structure for its agents, and took up its old assignment, only this time focusing on Majesty 12 rather than Dagon cultists or Nazis. This is the situation for the Pagan Publishing Supplement, with the characters serving as secret agents to a quasi-government organization that doesn't exist. They will come from all aspects of U.S. agencies, each assembling when their particular skills are needed. This also makes it easy to replace dead characters, as another agent will be activated and join the investigation. It puts the focus on investigating human cults more than Monster of the Week, as even with the increased firepower open to the characters, there's a good chunk of mythos creatures that aren't bothered by bullets. Combat in Delta Green is just as deadly in 1996 as it is in 1925, only now everybody has bigger guns. One of the biggest attractions for Delta Green was the absolute twisted enemies that the agents would encounter. Yeah, you've got the inbred hillbilly cultists, just like the classic version of Cthulhu, but there's a lot of new and unique bad guys for the players to investigate and stop. This is one of the strong points of Delta Green, the quality of the villains. You had the traditional Nazi occultists, but throw in a magical mafia, evil fertility clinics, several other government conspiracies, and even personified evil loneliness, and you've got some serious villains. This is in addition to the traditional Cthulhu baddies if you want an actual monster hunt. To top that off, sometimes the intelligence is faulty, resulting in Delta Green operatives facing just regular humans doing shady stuff. Creating a character in both versions of the game is pretty standard. In Pagan Press's version, it's the normal method of making any Call of Cthulhu PC, only with new skills to reflect the technological innovations of the modern day. Arc Dream utilized a variant of the system, with a few specific changes for a better dedicated mechanic. The Fall of Delta Green, which is the third book in the Delta Green series, uses the Gumshoe system, designed for more investigative games, which makes sense considering the premise. The only flaw with Gumshoe in this regard is Delta Green can become quite combat intensive, and their version is set in the Vietnam War, with simpler combat resolution rules that sometimes don't hold up. Delta Green and Call of Cthulhu's main difference is assigning your character an agency, the part of the government from which your characters get their authority. And it's not a small list of options. You go from the obvious, like the CIA, to the obscure, like the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. By splitting the group up across multiple agencies, somebody will have the appropriate authority and jurisdiction, no matter the investigation. The Cell Network also allows the GM to easily replace characters as a new agent will be assigned in case of casualties. Arc Dream's version is set after the events of 9/11, where the government realized they needed Delta Green as an official government agency. Not all of the original agents wanted to go back, so they kept the cowboy attitude for a few of them, which meant you could play the old school as well. They also made some changes on which bad guys made it to the modern day, as some villains didn't survive intact. One of the biggest aspects of that is nothing is officially canon, so you can pick and choose which groups are actually active. Keeps the parties guessing. Delta Green also combined Cold War influences and common conspiracies into the mythos lore, such as the Roswell aliens. Of course, these aliens are Mego posing as the typical gray aliens, who are in league with the rival government mythos investigation, Majesty 12. But if you have to have cattle-stealing, anal-probing bad guys, Delta Green has them. These guys serve as one of the principal big bads, and the primary non-human group the party's going to have to deal with. This also highlights the different mindsets the government agencies have toward Cthulhu tech. Majesty believes they can adopt it and use it to protect the world. Delta Green prefers to destroy all of it when they find it. The less anybody knows about it, the better, including them. Considering the effect Mythos lore equipment has on sanity ratings, Delta Green probably has the better idea. However, not all Mythos lore is forbidden to the characters, as magic plays a significant role in the game, though they call it hypergeometry. While it does make certain things easier for characters, it still costs sanity. A lot of the 2nd edition Delta Green renames the core mechanics of Call of Cthulhu for the updated rules, to avoid it sounding a bit archaic. Mythos lore becomes the unnatural skill, but the mechanics are still the same. The game does warn about magic not being appropriate for characters, and it doesn't lie. Every spell costs sanity and more. You're not going to be a spellcasting FBI agent and stay out of a padded cell for long. It's actually part of the MiGo plan. If hypergeometry becomes known in the world and is adopted by humanity, it speeds up the monster's plans for conquest. Still, for many of the unnatural creatures in the game, it's also the only way to harm them. There is a split among Delta Green fans between all the editions, with all sides having valid points. 2nd edition is the better version mechanically, as it updates Call of Cthulhu to a more narrow focus on the setting. The downside is that many of the iconic bad guys from the original Delta Green have been written out, having been defeated in the time jump. The issue is they haven't been replaced with newer threats of an equal scale. Some make sense, like getting rid of the Nazi scientist trying to use Cthulhu lore to conquer the world, as that's a bit cliché. But getting rid of the magic-using mafia or the rival government agency did remove a chunk of the tension that made the 1st edition so famous. The healthy mix, of course, is to use the more detailed yet streamlined 2nd edition, but keep playing in the 1st edition timeline. That fixes both problems with a little fuss. The 3rd member of the Delta Green family is The Fall of Delta Green by Pelgrane Press, written by Kenneth Haidt and published in 2018. This one is set in the Vietnam era, the time when Delta Green was disowned by the government and forced to go to ground. This uses the gumshoe system, like I've mentioned, which handles investigations better than Call of Cthulhu's D100 system, but it doesn't have as detailed a combat mechanics. It switches from percentiles to a D6 system, so the numbers for abilities and things like sanity are lower because the scale is smaller. It's very much devoted to the spy game and gave me James Bond vibes in a strange sort of way. No, you don't get cool gadgets, but it's the height of the Cold War. And instead of Spectre, you get to face down world-spanning cults. It does have a strong focus on the war, which is a major part of the setting, but I feel it could have done more with the rest of the world. At this point in history, everything's in turmoil. The Iron Curtain stands strong. South America alternates between coups and strongmen. Africa is about to see the rise of Idi Amin. China is dealing with the Great Leap Forward and all the aftermath of that debacle. Now take all that chaos and tension and add Nyarlathotep. There's just so many missed opportunities here. Those are the 3 versions of Delta Green. 1st edition is not a complete game. You need a copy of Call of Cthulhu to play. It has a decent amount of support and some of the most popular bad guys among the fan base. 2nd edition is a complete game, with rules dedicated to the premise and expanded mechanics, so insanity takes the form of PTSD or drug addiction rather than a fear of doilies, like somebody we know. It kicks the timeline to the present day, but eliminates many of the aforementioned bad guys. Fall of Delta Green uses a streamlined mechanic system with a heavier emphasis on investigation rather than the complex combat of previous versions. It does fall a bit short for me with the narrow scope of the setting, because it's the only version of Delta Green set in the Cold War. That's a lot of wasted potential in a rather turbulent era. Now, they could release Delta Green Cold War tomorrow, and all my complaints about that instantly vanish. The version you want to play is up to you. They all have their strengths regarding story and mechanics, so that's a personal choice. All of them are still in print, so price isn't an issue. You can get them from a variety of sources, including your friendly local game store. And that's Delta Green. It's a unique take on the original Call of Cthulhu that got turned into its own game, then a spin-off prequel with different mechanics to change how people play it. Which one is better? I've seen flame wars across the internet about that, as all versions have their fans. It just boils down to which one you like better. This game is mature. It doesn't sugarcoat any of the evils of Lovecraftian horror. It doubles down on it. Characters will go insane, but now for more mundane horrors and scary monsters in the dark. It's the standard Call of Cthulhu downward spirals as characters watch their sanity grind away, but the horrors are twisted versions of modern blights for the most part. Cultists will manipulate the public to gain support, pose as charities to earn sympathy, or play the victim when the government moves in to stop them. Bureaucracy and red tape become as much of a nemesis as ghouls and deep ones. It's a well-written game that had the advantage of being created at the right possible time. Next Mad Musings is a game that was sent for review, Zombie Road by Dragon Mount Press. This one is currently on Kickstarter with the unique premise that you play yourself in a game that's mostly one-shots. Well, not all one-shots, but that is one of the major aspects that they are angling towards. So will these mechanics help a zombie game after the age of Walking Dead has passed? Or has the zombie genre passed the sell-by date? Until then, remember, it's not a race to zero sanity.